The vampire king watched a janitor scrub his floors, bored, until lamplight caught the necklace at her throat. His breath stopped. That pendant had vanished with his executed sister in 1702, and this human shouldn't be alive wearing it. Except she was, and the council already had orders to kill anyone who possessed it. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Lucien Corvus stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, 50 stories above Chicago's glittering sprawl, and felt nothing as he reviewed the execution warrant spread across his desk like a hand of cards dealt by a particularly vindictive dealer. 3 centuries of this, and the boredom had calcified into something harder than bone, a numbness so complete he barely registered the weight of the fountain pen in his hand, or the way his signature flowed across parchment with the ease of long practice. Below, the city pulsed with Friday night energy, humans streaming between bars and restaurants, their lives flickering bright and brief as mayflies. And somewhere in the mechanical guts of his tower, the night shift cleaning crews moved through their routines, invisible as ghosts. He was reaching for the final warrant when movement on his surveillance feed caught his peripheral vision, a flicker of gray on the screen showing his private throne room. He froze. That floor should be locked, sealed behind 3 layers of security that required both biometric scanning and blood magic to breach. Yet there she was, a woman in a shapeless gray uniform kneeling beside his marble throne with a bucket and scrub brush, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her shoulders curved in the posture of someone who had spent years learning to take up as little space as possible. Lucien leaned closer to the screen, frowning, watching as she dipped her brush into soapy water and began scrubbing at the dried blood spattering the throne's base, remnants from tonight's council session when Vashti had made an example of a rogue vampire who'd fed in public view. The woman hummed something low and tuneless as she worked, her movements methodical, almost meditative, and Lucien felt a spike of irritation that this human had breached his sanctuary, that she was touching his throne, that she existed in a space meant for his solitude. Then the lamplight swung across her throat, and the world stopped. Silver glinted there, a pendant resting against her collarbones, and even through the grainy security feed Lucien recognized it with the sick certainty of a man watching his past rise from its grave. 3 intertwined serpents curled around a blood ruby the size of a robin's egg, their scales so finely wrought they seemed to move in the light. And he knew every curve of that piece because he'd watched his sister Mira fasten it around her throat on a winter night in 1702, her hands shaking as she prepared to meet the council that would condemn her to death. The glass tumbler in Lucien's hand shattered, bourbon and blood mixing as shards bit into his palm, but he barely felt the pain through the roaring in his ears. That pendant had vanished with Mira's body after her execution, lost or destroyed, and no one should be wearing it now. No human should survive wearing it because the ruby was bonded to Corvus' bloodline and burned anyone else who dared touch it. Yet this woman wore it like costume jewelry and lived. His feet moved before his mind caught up, carrying him through the penthouse door and down the emergency stairs, moving through shadows the way his kind had moved for millennia, silent and impossibly fast. 50 floors dissolved in seconds, and he was pushing through the concealed door behind his throne, stepping into lamplight and the sharp chemical smell of industrial cleaner mixed with the older scent of stone and old blood and magic that never quite left this room. The woman didn't sense him, still humming that broken melody as she scrubbed in small circles, her hands red and raw from the cleaning solution, and Lucien found himself cataloging details with the precision of a man trying to solve an impossible equation. Dark eyes set in an exhausted face, olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean ancestry, threadbare uniform hanging loose on a too-thin frame, and that pendant glowing faint crimson against her throat like a beating heart, not burning her. The breath left his lungs in a rush that felt like drowning. He stepped forward deliberately, letting his footfalls echo on marble, and watched her head jerk up, watched fear bloom across her features as she scrambled to her feet and sent the bucket tipping, soapy water spreading across stone in a slow tide. Her hand went to the pendant instinctively, protective, and Lucien had to lock every muscle to keep from reaching for it himself. "Who gave you that necklace?" he said, and his voice came out rougher than he'd intended, scraped raw by 3 centuries of accumulated grief. The woman's eyes went wide and dark as a startled deer's, and she backed up a step, her spine hitting the throne's armrest. It was my grandmother's," she stammered, words tumbling over each other. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be in here," the supervisor said. "The 3rd floor needed deep cleaning and I thought, I'm sorry." "Do you know what you're wearing?" Lucien interrupted, taking another step closer, near enough now to see the pulse hammering in her throat just below the pendant, to smell the cleaning chemicals on her skin, and underneath that, something warmer, human, and alive in a way that made his chest ache. She touched the pendant again, and he watched her fingers curl around it like a lifeline, watched her chin lift even as her hands shook. "It's just glass," she said. "It was hers. She said it came from the old country, that's all I know." Before Lucien could respond, before he could process the implications of grandmother and old country and the impossible fact of her survival, his phone chimed with the particular tone reserved for council alerts, a sound that had preceded violence more times than he could count. He pulled it from his pocket and read the text blazing across the screen. "Pendant signature detected. Sovereign Tower. Termination protocol engaged." His hand tightened around the phone hard enough to crack the case, and he looked up at the woman, really looked at her, saw her confusion giving way to fear as she registered something in his expression. "They're coming," he said quietly. "The council. They have standing orders to kill anyone possessing that pendant. No questions, no trial, no mercy." Behind him, the throne room door sealed with a magnetic click that echoed like a gunshot, and somewhere far above, he heard the whir of the private elevator descending, carrying Vashti's enforcers down to execute a 300-year-old order. 4 minutes, maybe less, and this woman would be dead on his floor, her blood mixing with the soap water and the older stains. And Lucien found himself facing a choice he hadn't confronted in centuries. Obey the law he'd served since before this country existed, or break it for a stranger wearing his dead sister's face. The woman stared at him with those dark, exhausted eyes, and he saw in them the same stubborn defiance Mira had shown when the council came for her, the same refusal to bow even when bowing meant survival, and something in his chest that he'd thought long dead cracked open like spring ice. "Do you trust me?" he asked, already reaching for her wrist, already knowing her answer didn't matter, because he'd made his choice the moment he saw that pendant glow against her skin and not burn it to ash. The woman shook her head slowly, honest even in her terror, and Lucien felt his mouth curve in something that might have been a smile if he remembered how to make one. "Smart," he said, and pulled her toward the hidden panel behind the throne as the elevator chimed its arrival 3 floors above and boots began hammering down the stairwell. "Come anyway." Lucien heard the boots in the stairwell, 3 floors up and descending fast, the rhythmic thunder of enforcers moving with predatory efficiency, and his hand closed around Elena's wrist before conscious thought could intervene. "Do you trust me?" he asked again, and watched her shake her head with an honesty that would have been funny under different circumstances. "Smart," he said, and pulled her toward the hidden panel behind the throne, his thumb finding the pressure point that released the magnetic seal. "Come anyway." The panel swung open onto darkness, and a narrow servant's passage that smelled of old stone and older magic, steep stairs descending into the tower's bones. And Elena stumbled after him because his grip left no choice, his hand impossibly strong and cold as marble around her fragile wrist. She tried to pull free as they plunged down into blackness. I didn't steal anything, she gasped, her voice echoing off close walls. I know, Lucien said without slowing. They'll kill you anyway. The stairs seemed endless, spiraling down through levels that didn't appear on any official blueprint, past sealed doors that hummed with preservation spells. And Lucien counted floors in his head while listening to the enforcers above spreading through the throne room, their boots scattering across marble as they searched for quarry that had already vanished. They exited into sub-basement archives at the tower's foundation, a vast concrete warren lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes that cast everything in sickly yellow light, and the air tasted of dust and old paper and the particular staleness of information sealed away from the world. Lucien guided Elena to a metal table scarred with decades of use, pulled out a chair, and she sat because her legs were shaking too badly to hold her upright. He moved to a terminal crusted with dust, fingers flying across keys with the ease of someone who'd been navigating databases since before they went digital. Your grandmother's name, he said. Rosalia Reyes, Elena whispered, hugging herself against the basement chill. She came from Spain in 1958, that's all I know. She died before I was born. Lucien's fingers paused, then resumed their staccato rhythm, and a family tree bloomed across the screen like a flowering vine, branches reaching back through centuries in a tangle of names and dates and connections that made Elena's head spin. He traced one line with his finger, following it backward through Spanish parishes and Mexican villages and European courts, past wars and plagues and migrations, until he stopped on a name highlighted in red. Mira Corvus, born 1681, executed 1702 for crimes against the Sovereign Council. One surviving daughter, the notation read, smuggled to convent in Seville. The line descended through centuries of women, nuns and merchants and midwives, mothers and daughters passing down a pendant, and whispered warnings about old country dangers, ending at Rosalia Reyes, and then at the bottom, freshly added by the database's automated genealogy protocols, Elena Reyes, living, Chicago. You're my sister's descendant, Lucien said, his voice carefully flat in the way of someone trying not to feel anything at all. Elena stared at the screen, at the impossible cascade of names connecting her to a woman executed 300 years ago for loving the wrong person. That's impossible, she said. Lucien touched the screen and Mira's portrait loaded, a painting done in oils and firelight, showing a young woman with dark eyes and defiant chin and the serpent pendant resting against her collarbones exactly as it now rested against Elena's. You have her face, he said quietly. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the fluorescent hum and the distant clang of enforcers searching floors above, and Elena touched the pendant with shaking fingers, feeling its warmth pulse against her palm. Vashti's voice crackled over the tower intercom at 1:15 in the morning, amplified and cold as winter. Lucien, surrender the human. The law is clear. Penalties for harboring apply to all, even council members. You have 10 minutes to comply. Lucien pulled Elena deeper into the archives without answering, past rows of blood-sealed vaults that thrummed with containment magic, past shelves groaning under the weight of centuries of vampire bureaucracy, until he stopped before a vault marked with Corvus family seals and pressed his palm to the lock. It recognized his blood and opened with a hiss of released pressure, revealing a climate-controlled interior holding a single glass case. Inside lay a document on parchment so old it looked like it might crumble to dust if breathed on too hard, covered in careful calligraphy and sealed with 7 wax stamps in different colors. The original council charter, Lucien said, lifting the case with reverent care. 1701. Drafted the year before they killed Mira. He scanned the text, jaw muscles flexing, and Elena watched his expression shift through calculations she couldn't follow. There's a loophole, he said finally. The termination order applies to thieves and enemies, those who steal or claim Corvus property through deception. But if you're blood family, legitimate descendant, you're exempt from summary execution. He set the case down, hands careful on the glass. Except the council will argue Mira's line was legally severed at her execution, that her descendants have no claim to Corvus protection or property. Elena touched the pendant again, feeling its steady warmth, and looked at Lucien's profile in the harsh fluorescent light, seeing past the inhuman beauty to something raw and desperate underneath. "Why does it matter so much?" she asked. "It's just a necklace." Lucien's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "Because it's the key to something they buried with her," he said. "Something that could destroy them if it ever came to light." He didn't say. "Something I was too weak to use to save her," didn't say. "Something I've spent 3 centuries trying to forget." Footsteps echoed closer, boots on concrete, and voices called out coordinates as Vashti's enforcers swept the sublevels in grid patterns, tightening the noose floor by floor. Lucien made a decision, his shoulders straightening with the weight of it. "I'm invoking sanctuary right," he said. "Ancient law, older than the council itself. If I claim you under my personal protection before the assembled council and you accept, they can't touch you without a formal trial, can't execute you without hearing evidence and allowing defense." Elena's throat felt tight. "What does that cost?" she asked, though some part of her already knew the answer. His eyes met hers, and she saw in them the accumulated weight of centuries, of failures and compromises, and slow erosion of whatever ideals he'd started with. "Everything," he said simply. It cost everything, because claiming sanctuary meant declaring the council wrong, meant challenging Vashti's authority, meant gambling his throne and his position, and possibly his existence on the chance that 300-year-old law still held weight against modern council politics, and they both knew Vashti wouldn't forgive that kind of defiance. Lucien brought Elena to his penthouse at 3:47 in the morning, the elevator rising through the tower's spine while enforcers searched its guts. And when the doors opened onto glass and steel and minimalist luxury, the city spread below them like a glittering game board turning gray with approaching dawn. He poured her water from a crystal pitcher, his hands steady but only just, not trusting himself with anything stronger. And Elena sat on the edge of a black leather sofa, still wearing her janitor uniform, with the pendant glowing softly against her throat. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, voice small in the vast space. Lucien turned to the windows, unable to look at her face that was too much like Mira's face, at her hands that moved like Mira's hands, at the pendant he'd watched his sister fasten around her throat on the last night she'd been alive. "Because I didn't help her," he said to the city and the dawn. Long silence filled the penthouse, broken only by the soft hum of climate control and the distant wail of sirens far below, and Elena stood, crossed the polished concrete floor until she was beside him at the windows, her reflection small and dark next to his in the glass. "Your sister," she said. It wasn't a question. Lucien nodded, still not looking at her. "I was younger then," he said. "Weaker, though I thought myself strong. The council said she broke sacred law by loving a human, by sharing our secrets with prey, by putting passion above duty. I believed them because believing was easier than fighting, because I'd been raised to trust council wisdom above my own judgment." He paused, throat working. "I let them take her, let them drag her to the execution chamber, while I stood silent in my council robes and did nothing." His reflection in the glass looked haunted, hollowed out, and Elena's hand hovered near his shoulder without quite touching, afraid of what contact might unleash. "What happened to the human she loved?" she asked softly. "They killed him first," Lucien said. "Made her watch, made sure she understood the price of her defiance before they ended her. The pendant was supposed to die with her, buried with her ashes, but someone smuggled it out along with her infant daughter." He finally looked at Elena. "Someone braver than I was." Outside the windows, the sky bled pink and gold as the sun prepared to break the horizon, and Lucien's phone buzzed with an incoming message that made the air feel suddenly thinner. Council summons, 8 p.m. tonight, the notification read. Vashti's follow-up appeared beneath it. Sanctuary right acknowledged under protest. Trial scheduled. Prepare your defense. Lucien, this won't end the way you hope. Elena read the messages over his shoulder and felt the weight of inevitability settle over them both like a shroud. What happens at the trial? She asked. Lucien slipped the phone back into his pocket and watched the sun touch the horizon, knowing he had perhaps 12 hours before everything he'd built over 3 centuries came crashing down around him. We find out, he said, if I've finally learned how to fight for something that matters, or if I'm still the same coward who let my sister burn. The council chamber was a perfect circle carved from black stone that seemed to drink the light, 13 high-backed chairs arranged like teeth in a predator's jaw, and the walls were lined with mirrors that showed not the bodies of those reflected, but something deeper and more terrible. Elena saw herself fractured into 1,000 shivering versions, each one showing a different fear, a different possible death, while Lucien's reflection was nothing but shadow, with eyes that burned like coals in a forge. Vashti presided from the tallest chair, ancient and elegant in black silk, that moved like oil, and 12 other council members watched in silence, with the patience of creatures who had weathered centuries, and could wait centuries more. Lucien stood beside Elena in the center of the circle, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his body, and she focused on that sensation to keep from looking at the mirrors and the 1,000 ways she might die. Vashti spoke, and her voice filled the chamber like smoke. The human wears the traitor's pendant, she said. The law is clear: execution for theft, desecration, and unlawful possession of Corvus property. I've invoked sanctuary right, Lucien said, his voice steady as stone. She's under my protection, acknowledged by council protocol. Sanctuary cannot be revoked without trial and evidence. Vashti's smile was cold as winter. Sanctuary right applies only to known family members, Lucien. Mira Corvus's line was severed legally upon her execution. This human may share distant blood, but she is no relation in the eyes of council law. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the other council members, and Elena felt the weight of their attention like pressure against her skin. Lucien's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping. Blood doesn't lie, he said. The pendant accepted her, didn't burn her. Only Corvus blood can wear it without being consumed. You know this. Or a very skilled thief with the right spells, Vashti countered. She gestured, and an enforcer materialized from the shadows, carrying a wooden case worn smooth by centuries of handling. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a silver dagger with a hilt wrapped in gold wire and a blade that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. The kinship blade, Vashti said, forged in the family's founding, keyed to Corvus' bloodline. If she's truly descended from Mira, it will glow in her hand like the sun. If not, it will kill her where she stands, burn her from the inside out. She looked at Elena with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Either way, the matter is resolved. Elena looked at Lucien and saw his face had gone to stone, but his hand trembled slightly at his side, fingers flexing as if reaching for something he couldn't touch. He could not interfere without breaking sanctuary protocol, could not stop this test without invalidating the very protection he'd invoked, and she saw in his eyes the same helpless rage he must have felt watching Mira walk to her execution. Vashti rose from her chair with the fluid grace of a hunting cat and descended to the circle's center, extending the blade to Elena hilt first. "Take it, child," she said. "Prove your claim or die proving you lied. Either outcome serves justice." Elena's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her fingertips, in the pendant that rested warm against her collarbones. She looked at the dagger, at the silver blade that caught the dim light, and threw it back in fragments and thought of her grandmother's last words whispered from a hospital bed. "You carry old blood, mijita. Don't be afraid of it, it's stronger than you know." She reached out, fingers extending through air that felt thick as honey, and gripped the hilt. Cold silver burned her palm like touching dry ice, and she gasped, nearly dropping it. But then the burn transformed into something else, something that felt like recognition, and the blade erupted in white gold light that flooded the chamber like a star going nova. Elena heard herself cry out, but couldn't hear it over the roaring in her ears. The singing of the blade, a high, keening note that set her teeth on edge and made the mirrors scream. The council members threw up hands to shield their eyes, and Vashti stumbled backward, her face slack with shock, and the mirrors shattered one by one, exploding outward in cascades of glass that hung suspended in the air like frozen rain. The light was everywhere, pouring from the blade in Elena's hand, pouring from the pendant at her throat, and she understood in that moment that she was a conduit for something vast and old and furious, something that had been sleeping in her blood for 300 years and was now awake and hungry. When the light finally faded, the blade in Elena's hand glowed steady and pure as a captive moon, and her palm was unburned, unmarked, whole. Broken glass covered the floor in drifts like snow, and the chamber felt different, smaller, as if the walls had drawn closer in fear. Silence pressed down on them all. Lucien exhaled, a sound like prayer or breaking, and his hand moved toward her before he caught himself and let it fall. Vashti recovered, her composure settling back over her features like a mask, though her eyes remained hard. "The blade confirms Corvus blood," she said. Her voice was tight, controlled. "I acknowledge Elena Reyes as descended from Mira Corvus, 10th generation, legitimate heir to bloodline rights and properties." But she paused, and Elena felt the trap in that pause like a noose tightening. That changes nothing. She still possesses the traitor's pendant illegally. Mira Corvus was executed for treason, and all her property was forfeit to the council. The pendant belongs to us. The human must surrender it and submit to exile, leave our territories and never return, or die. Lucien stepped forward and his voice cut through the chamber. "The pendant wasn't forfeit," he said. "It was stolen from Mira's body before her ashes were sealed. Check the execution records. No inventory was filed, no accounting made. You cannot claim ownership of property you never legally possessed." Vashti's eyes narrowed to slits. "You're splitting hairs, Lucien." "I'm citing law," he countered. "If the pendant was stolen, removed from Mira's body before council inventory, it's not council property. It passed through Mira's daughter to her descendants. Legally, it belongs to Elena by right of inheritance." The silence that followed felt dangerous, charged like the air before lightning, and Elena watched Vashti's face transform from irritation to something calculating and cold. "Then let her keep it," Vashti said, and her smile returned sharper than the kinship blade. "Let her wear it and face the consequence." She began to circle them, her footsteps crunching on broken glass. "The pendant is a death lock, keyed to Mira's sealed vault beneath the glass chapel. Anyone wearing it who enters that vault will trigger the final curse Mira placed before she died, a curse of total annihilation, burning the wearer and anyone bonded to them down to ash and memory." She stopped in front of Lucien. "If you've truly claimed her under sanctuary, your fates are linked by blood magic. Touch the vault and you both burn, Lucien. Both of you, consumed by your sister's last act of defiance." Lucien went very still, and Elena felt the pendant against her chest like ice suddenly, like a stone around her neck, and understood that everything Vashti had done had been leading to this moment, this trap. Vashti continued, addressing the council now. "We offer mercy. Elena Reyes may surrender the pendant to council custody and accept exile from all vampire territories. She may live her mortal life far from us, untouched and unmolested. Refuse, and we'll ensure she's drawn to that vault, one way or another." She gestured to the enforcers ringing the chamber. "Curiosity is a powerful thing, and humans are such curious creatures. We have 72 hours to decide what?" Elena asked, finding her voice for the first time since taking the blade, and it came out stronger than she expected. Whether you value your life over your pride, Vashti said, whether Lucien values his throne over his guilt, the vault has waited 3 centuries. It can wait 3 more days for you to make the sensible choice. She returned to her chair, settling into it like a queen on a throne. You have 72 hours. Use them wisely. Dismissed. The enforcers moved forward, and Lucien's hand closed around Elena's elbow, guiding her toward the chamber doors before the council could change their minds or add new conditions. She still held the kinship blade, and it pulsed warm in her grip, steady as a heartbeat. And as they walked through the shattered glass, Elena felt something shift inside her, some understanding that she was not the helpless cleaning woman who had stumbled into this nightmare, but something else, something dangerous and valuable and called. The pendant pulsed against her throat in rhythm with the blade, and she thought she heard a voice, faint and far away, whispering words she couldn't quite make out, and knew, without knowing how, that it was Mira calling her home, calling her to the glass chapel, calling her to finish what had been started 300 years ago when a woman had loved too fiercely and paid for it with everything. Lucien brought Elena to his private library at 9 in the morning on November 5th, unlocking a door sealed with 3 different wards and leading her into a vast room that smelled of old paper and leather and something darker. The iron tang of blood-inked treaties that had held vampire law together for centuries. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned under the weight of books and scrolls and documents bound in materials Elena didn't want to identify, and the morning light filtering through stained glass windows turned everything amber and gold. He pulled records of Mira's execution from a locked cabinet, spreading them across a mahogany table worn smooth by centuries of use, and they read together in silence, broken only by the whisper of turning pages. Details emerged like bones surfacing from shallow graves. Mira Corvus, age 21, had fallen in love with a human scholar named Thomas Gray, who was researching vampire governance structures for a book he'd never lived to publish. She had shared council secrets with him, meeting in hidden rooms and walking in gardens after dark, hoping together they might reform a system grown corrupt and cruel over centuries of unchecked power. The council discovered the relationship through an informant whose name was redacted from the records, declared it treason against vampire sovereignty, and executed them both in the winter of 1702. But the records showed something else, a detail that made Lucien's hands still on the page. Mira had requested one final ritual before death, the right to seal her testimony in a vault, an ancient practice allowed under old law to preserve a condemned vampire's truth for future generations. The council had granted it, the document said, confident no one could ever access the vault without the pendant they believed they would destroy. Lucien traced a line in the document with his finger, his voice quiet when he spoke. Her testimony is still sealed, he said. Whatever she knew, whatever Thomas discovered about council operations, it's in that vault beneath the glass chapel. 300 years and no one has touched it. Elena touched the pendant and felt its warmth pulse against her palm. And if we open it, we die, she said. The curse Vashti described. Lucien looked at her, and she saw something hungry moving behind his eyes, a need that had been starving for centuries. Unless the curse isn't what Vashti claims, he said. Mira wouldn't have wanted to hurt her own bloodline. She was many things, but never cruel. She would have wanted her descendant to know the truth. But you can't be sure, Elena said, and heard the question underneath her words. How much are you willing to risk? Long pause filled with dust motes turning in amber light and the weight of centuries pressing down on them both. Lucien closed the book, his jaw tight. No, he said, I can't be sure. But Elena saw the hunger in his eyes, saw that he wanted the truth more than safety, more than his throne, more than the careful existence he'd built over 300 years of compromise and silence. And she realized with a clarity that felt like falling that she wanted it too, wanted to know what Mira had been willing to die to preserve. On November 6th, at 2 in the afternoon, Elena insisted on returning to her apartment to collect belongings before the deadline expired. And Lucien assigned 2 guards who followed her through the streets with the subtle menace of predators pretending to be human. She slipped away from them in a crowded grocery store, ducking between aisles and out a service entrance. And she knew it was foolish, but she needed space to think, needed to be alone with herself and the weight pressing against her chest. Her studio apartment was tiny and dim with walls thin enough that she could hear her neighbors arguing in Spanish through the plaster, and she sat on her bed holding the pendant and trying to understand how her life had transformed so completely in less than a week. Her phone rang, the screen showing unknown number, and she answered without thinking. A woman's voice spoke, old and rasping like wind through dead leaves. "You're Rosalia's granddaughter," the voice said. "Who is this?" Elena asked, her hand tightening on the phone. "Someone who knew Mira," the voice said. "Someone who remembers what they did to her. Listen carefully because I won't repeat this. Don't go to the vault. The council will kill you both the moment you're inside, curse or no curse. Vashti's already positioned enforcers around the glass chapel. It's a trap." The line went dead before Elena could respond, leaving her staring at the phone and trying to breathe through the panic tightening her ribs. A knock at her door made her jump, and when she opened it, Lucien stood there alone, fury and relief warring on his face. "You can't run from me," he said. "We're bonded. The sanctuary link means I can find you anywhere." "I wasn't running," Elena said, stepping back to let him enter. "I needed to breathe." He stepped inside and seemed too large for the cramped space, his head nearly brushing the water-stained ceiling, and she watched his eyes move over her life. Bills stacked on a folding table, a single photograph of her grandmother in a drugstore frame, thrift store furniture held together with hope and duct tape. His expression softened into something that might have been understanding or grief. "You were invisible to them," he said quietly. "To everyone." "I liked it that way," Elena said, and met his eyes. Being invisible meant being safe. She gestured to her phone still clutched in her hand. "I got a call just now. Someone who said she knew Mira. She warned me the council's setting a trap at the vault, that Vashti has enforcers positioned around the glass chapel already." Lucien's jaw tightened, muscles flexing. "Vashti," he said. "Of course she wouldn't wait for the deadline. She'll force our hand, make us come to her on grounds she controls." Elena stood, the pendant swinging against her chest. "So we don't go," she said. "We run. Exile might not be perfect, but at least we'd be alive." "It is," Lucien said flatly. "Exile means they hunt you the moment I'm not watching, the moment my attention slips. Vashti will send enforcers to every city you hide in, make examples of anyone who helps you. This only ends if we break their power completely." "How?" Elena asked. "By proving Mira was right," he said, looking at the pendant with an intensity that made Elena's breath catch. "Whatever she sealed in that vault is dangerous enough that they've spent 3 centuries ensuring no one could reach it. That kind of fear means leverage. It means power they can't afford to lose." On November 7th at 11 at night, Lucien called a secret meeting with 2 council members he trusted, or at least distrusted less than the others. Counselor Aram, ancient and scholarly, made uncomfortable by Vashti's increasingly authoritarian methods, and Counselor Isla, younger at only 200 years old, who had once questioned Mira's execution and been punished with a century of exile for her dissent. They met in a shuttered church basement that smelled of damp stone and forgotten incense, gathering around a single candle that threw their shadows huge and distorted against the walls. "If you challenge Vashti openly, she'll move the execution up," Aram said without preamble. "You have less than 24 hours before she decides the deadline is a formality she can ignore." Isla leaned forward, her face sharp in the candlelight. The glass chapel vault is warded with preservation spells, she said. If Elena enters wearing the pendant, the wards will activate and recognize her as keyed bearer. But the curse itself, the deathlock Vashti described, I helped design Mira's seal 3 centuries ago. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to reveal. Lucien's hands stilled on the table. What do you mean? He asked. Mira encoded her testimony into the pendant itself, Isla said. When it enters the vault, when the wards recognize Corvus blood, the testimony will project as light and sound and memory for anyone present to witness. It's a confession, an accusation, a historical record all compressed into blood magic and ruby crystal. Then why did Vashti claim it's a deathlock? Elena asked. Because the testimony implicates 12 council members, including Vashti, in a conspiracy to fabricate evidence against Mira, Aram said. His voice was heavy with old shame. Thomas Gray wasn't researching vampire governance as an academic exercise. He uncovered proof that the council was trafficking human blood illegally, selling protection to rogue vampires in exchange for profit, operating a black market that violated every treaty we'd signed. Mira tried to expose them, to bring the evidence before the full council. They framed it as treason, claimed she was sharing state secrets to undermine vampire security, and executed her to bury the truth. Silence filled the basement, thick and choking, and Lucien's hands curled into fists on the table. They killed her to protect themselves, he said, and his voice was soft and more dangerous than shouting. They let me believe she was a traitor when she was trying to save us from our own corruption. If the testimony plays publicly, the council's authority collapses, Isla said. Every treaty, every law they've enforced for 3 centuries becomes suspect. Vashti knows this. She'll do anything to stop you from reaching the vault, or ensure you're killed before anyone else can witness what Mira preserved. Elena had been listening in silence, turning the pendant between her fingers, and now she spoke. So we make sure everyone sees it, she said. We don't sneak in alone. We bring witnesses, broadcast it, make it impossible to suppress. Lucien looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Some recognition that she had stopped being the frightened woman he'd pulled into the servants' passage and become something else. Someone willing to walk into fire if it meant the truth survived. That means walking into the trap, he said, knowing Vashti's enforcers will be waiting. Elena touched the pendant and felt its warmth spread through her palm, up her arm, into her chest where it settled like courage or madness or both. Mira walked into worse, she said. She walked in knowing she'd die and sealed her truth anyway. I'm not less brave than my own blood. The candle guttered and threw wild shadows across the basement walls, and Lucien reached across the table to steady Elena's hand where it rested on the pendant, his fingers cold and strong against her skin. He didn't let go for a long moment, and in that contact, Elena felt the full weight of the bond between them, the sanctuary magic that linked their fates, and something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with 2 people choosing to stand together against the darkness pressing in from all sides. The planning happened in Lucien's penthouse at 12:30 in the morning on November 8th. The 4 of them gathered around the dining table with the city glittering 50 floors below like scattered diamonds, and the weight of what they were about to attempt pressed down on them like the air before a storm. They would go to the glass chapel at 3 in the morning, Lucien said, spreading a blueprint of the building across the table. Aram would contact media before they arrived. Both vampire-controlled channels that couldn't ignore a council scandal, and independent human journalists who covered supernatural politics with the tenacity of people who knew they were documenting history. Isla would invoke right of witness, an ancient rule older than the council itself that allowed any member to observe vault openings and required the proceedings to be public and recorded. If they could get enough witnesses present, cameras rolling and eyes watching, Vashti couldn't kill them quietly, couldn't make them disappear into the same silence that had swallowed Mira. But, Isla said, her finger tracing the vault's location on the blueprint, the wards will activate the moment Elena enters with the pendant. The testimony will project immediately, but it takes 60 seconds to fully load. 60 seconds for the magic to unspool 3 centuries of compressed memory and transform it into something witnesses can perceive. 60 seconds during which Vashti's enforcers will try to kill you both. I'll hold them off, Lucien said. You stay behind me, close to the pedestal. I'm not hiding anymore, Elena said, and her voice was steady, despite the fear she could feel crawling up her spine. Lucien looked at her, really looked, and saw past the exhausted face and trembling hands to the steady eyes beneath, saw the determination that had carried her through a life of invisibility and survival. You're Mira's blood, he said quietly. Stubborn as she was, brave as she was, foolish as she was. Is that a compliment? Elena asked. It's a warning, he said. She almost smiled, something fragile and fierce. And the moment stretched between them until Isla interrupted. Vashti will argue the testimony is fabricated, she said. Blood magic can be faked, memories can be altered. We need corroboration, something independent that confirms what Mira sealed. Aram pulled a flash drive from his pocket, the small piece of plastic looking absurdly modern against the ancient documents spread across the table. Thomas Gray's original research, he said. I've kept it hidden for 3 centuries, moved it from city to city, copied it onto new formats as technology changed. Dates, transactions, names of every corrupt council member, and every illegal deal they made. When the testimony plays, I'll release this simultaneously to every news outlet present. Between the two, the council's lies collapse completely. Lucien gripped Aram's shoulder, his hand tight with gratitude he didn't have words for. Thank you, he said. Aram met his eyes, and in them Lucien saw the weight of 300 years of guilt. I should have stood with Mira then, Aram said. I was too afraid of losing my position, my comfort, my safety. I won't fail twice. The glass chapel sat on a cliff overlooking Lake Michigan at 3 a.m, abandoned for a century after some long-forgotten schism had left it too tainted for vampire use. Its walls made of frosted glass panels that glowed faintly under moonlight, like the bones of some massive, translucent creature. Lucien and Elena arrived in his car, tires crunching on gravel, and the air smelled like snow and cold stone, and the vast dark water stretching to the horizon. Vashti was waiting at the entrance, flanked by 8 enforcers dressed in black tactical gear, and she smiled when she saw them approach. I didn't think you'd come, she said. I thought even you weren't foolish enough to walk into certain death. The right of witness has been invoked, Lucien said. Counselor Isla and Counselor Aram are en route with observers. You can't interfere without violating protocols older than your authority. Vashti's smile didn't waver. I don't need to interfere, she said. The vault will do my work for me. Your precious human will trigger Mira's curse and burn, and you'll burn with her through your sanctuary bond. Justice delayed but still served. Behind her, headlights cut through the darkness, a convoy of vehicles approaching up the winding cliff road. News vans with satellite dishes, black cars carrying vampire dignitaries summoned by Isla's emergency notices, human journalists with cameras and recording equipment who smelled blood in the water and came running. Isla and Aram arrived, bringing a crowd that swelled to 30 people, then 40, cameras already rolling and questions being shouted. Vashti's smile thinned to a hard line, but she stepped aside. Proceed then, she said. Let's see what your precious Mira left behind, what truth she thought was worth dying for. The vault entrance was beneath the chapel altar, hidden behind a stone panel that Lucien slid aside to reveal a spiral staircase descending into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the light. Lucien went first, moving down steps worn smooth by centuries, and Elena followed with the pendant glowing brighter with each step, pulsing against her chest like a second heartbeat. Witnesses crowded at the top of the stairs, cameras recording, vampire dignitaries murmuring among themselves, and the descent felt eternal. The vault chamber was circular with walls lined with glass cases holding ancient artifacts, weapons and documents and objects whose purposes had been forgotten by everyone except the dead. At the center stood a stone pedestal carved with symbols that predated written language, and set into its top was a circular indentation shaped exactly like the pendant, waiting for 300 years to be filled. The air hummed with residual magic, preservation spells layered so thick Elena could taste them like copper on her tongue. Vashti's voice echoed from above, amplified by the stone. "Place the pendant, little human. Let's see if you survive what your ancestor left behind." Elena looked at Lucien and saw him tense, every muscle coiled like a spring wound too tight, his hands flexing at his sides. "I'll be right here," he said, "no matter what happens." She stepped forward, her footsteps echoing in the chamber, and removed the pendant with hands that shook despite her best efforts to steady them. The chain slipped over her head, and the pendant hung from her fingers, warm and pulsing, and she thought of her grandmother whispering warnings about old country dangers, and her own voice saying she wouldn't hide anymore. She placed the pendant in the indentation. Click. The pendant locked into place, with the sound of something ancient recognizing something it had been waiting for, and light exploded outward, white gold and blinding, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. The walls became screens, the glass cases projecting images, and Mira appeared life-sized and solid, as if she stood among them, young and fierce and alive in a way that made Lucien's breath catch in his throat. Her voice filled the chamber, clear and strong. "If you're seeing this, I'm dead," Mira said, "and the council has lied about why." The testimony began to unspool, Mira describing Thomas's research in careful detail, the council's illegal blood trafficking operation that had generated fortunes while violating every treaty that protected humans from predation, the falsified evidence planted in her chambers, the manufactured confession they'd tried to force from her before deciding execution was simpler. 60 seconds. Above them, Vashti screamed, raw and furious. "Shut it down! Kill them! Now!" Enforcers descended the staircase in a rush of boots and drawn blades, and Lucien met them halfway up, moving with the lethal speed of a vampire who had survived 3 centuries by being faster and more ruthless than his enemies. He was outnumbered 8-1, but he was older, stronger, and fighting for something that mattered more than survival. Glass shattered, cases exploding as bodies slammed into them. Blood sprayed across white stone. Elena watched the projection, Mira's face filling the walls, and counted seconds in her head. 40. An enforcer broke past Lucien, dodging a strike that would have taken his head off, and lunged down the stairs toward Elena with a knife extended. She didn't freeze, didn't scream, didn't wait for rescue. She grabbed a shard of broken glass from the floor where a case had shattered, the edges cutting into her palm, and drove it into his throat when he reached her. He collapsed, gurgling, blood pooling around him, and Elena stared at her hands shaking and red. Lucien glanced back, eyes wide with something between horror and recognition. "Elena," he started. "Watch your back," she shouted, and he turned just in time to block another blade aimed at his spine. 20 seconds. Mira's voice continued, steady and unflinching. "I loved a human," she said. "That wasn't my crime. My crime was threatening their power, exposing their corruption, believing that truth mattered more than comfort. If you're hearing this, whoever you are, finish what I started. Don't let them bury the truth again." The projection ended, images fading, and the pendant ejected from the pedestal with a soft click, dropping into Elena's hands, no longer glowing, but warm, and somehow lighter. Silence filled the vault, broken only by the breathing of wounded enforcers and the drip of blood on stone. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, and Vashti descended alone, clapping with mocking slowness. "A beautiful story," she said. Irrelevant, of course. Testimony from a condemned traitor proves nothing. Blood magic can be manipulated, memories can be altered. You've accomplished nothing except ensuring your own deaths. Aram's voice came from the top of the stairs, amplified so everyone present could hear. Then explain this, he said, holding up the flash drive for the cameras. Thomas Gray's original research, unaltered, verified by 3 independent archivists. Dates, transactions, names. Every corrupt council member listed, every illegal deal documented. Cross-referenced with Mira's testimony, and it all matches perfectly. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. Journalists shouting questions. Vampire dignitaries murmuring among themselves, some shocked and others calculating how this changed the power structure. Vashti's face went cold and flat, all pretense of civility dropping away to reveal something ancient and vicious. "You're all traitors," she hissed. Lucien stepped forward, blood on his hands and face, exhaustion and triumph warring in his expression. "No," he said. "We're done protecting yours." Vashti snarled, a sound more animal than human, and lunged at Elena with a concealed blade she'd pulled from her sleeve, moving with the speed that had made her feared for centuries. Lucien intercepted faster, grabbing her wrist and twisting until bones ground together and her blade clattered to the floor. He held her there, arm bent at an unnatural angle, and she could see him trembling with the effort of restraint. "You killed my sister for greed," he said quietly. "For profit and power, and the comfort of not being questioned. I won't kill you, much as I want to. I'll let the council you corrupted decide your fate. Let them judge you the way you judged Mira." He released her and she stumbled back, cradling her wrist. Isla's voice rang out, formal and final. "Counselor Vashti, you are stripped of authority pending full investigation. Surrender your seal immediately." Vashti looked around the chamber, at the cameras recording everything, at the vampire dignitaries whose support she'd counted on now backing away, at the enforcers who had survived lying wounded and unwilling to fight for her anymore. No allies, no escape, every eye watching her fall. Slowly, she removed her council ring, the seal of her authority, and dropped it on the bloody floor where it rolled in a lazy circle before settling. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes," Lucien said. "It is." Dawn broke over Lake Michigan at 5:30 in the morning, the sky bleeding pink and gold across water that stretched to the horizon like hammered metal, and Lucien sat on the cliff edge outside the glass chapel, with his legs dangling over the drop, waves crashing against rocks 50 feet below. Elena sat beside him close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and neither had spoken for 10 minutes. Both of them watching the sun climb and listening to the water and trying to process what they'd survived. The glass chapel was empty now, witnesses dispersed to their homes and newsrooms to write stories that would reshape vampire politics for generations. Vashti taken into custody by Aram's loyal enforcers, her own guards disarmed and facing their own investigations. Elena still wore the pendant, no longer glowing but warm against her skin like a living thing, and Lucien's hands were clean now after he'd washed the blood away in the freezing lake water, but his shirt was torn and stained with evidence of the violence that had earned them this fragile peace. He broke the silence, his voice rough from shouting orders during the fight. "The council will need to restructure completely," he said. "Aram and Isla will push for reforms, transparency measures, human representation. It'll take decades to undo 3 centuries of corruption." "Will you help them?" Elena asked. "I don't know," Lucien said, and the honesty in his voice made it hurt more. "I've served that council for 323 years. I've defined myself by my position, my duty, my service to their authority. I don't know who I am without it." Elena looked at him, really looked, seeing past the immortal beauty to the man underneath, who was just as lost as she'd been a week ago. "You're the man who saved me," she said, "who saved your sister's memory, who fought the council he'd served for centuries because it was right. That's who you are." "I didn't save her," Lucien said. his jaw tight. Elena, I let them kill her. I stood there and watched and did nothing. You finished what she started, Elena said. You made sure her truth survived, made sure her death meant something. That's not nothing. Long pause filled with the sound of waves and gulls crying overhead, and when Lucien spoke again, his voice had gone rough with something that might have been tears, if he still remembered how to cry. You should go home, he said. Back to your life, your apartment, your invisibility. You've done enough, sacrificed enough. This world will chew you up if you stay. Is that what you want? Elena asked, and her breath caught in her throat waiting for his answer. It's what's safe, he said. I didn't fight my way out of that vault for safe, Elena said, and stood, turning to face him with the sunrise at her back, turning her hair to fire. I'm Mira's heir, Lucien. I carry her blood and her pendant and her fight. I'm not walking away from this, from the chance to actually change something, to make sure no one else gets executed for loving the wrong person or asking the wrong questions. I'm not walking away from you. Lucien stood slowly, unfolding to his full height, and the morning light caught the exhaustion in his face and the hope he was trying not to feel. If you stay, they'll come for you, he said. Vashti has allies on the council who won't forgive this exposure. The council's enemies will see you as a symbol, try to use you or destroy you. Your life will never be quiet again, never be safe. It was never quiet, Elena said. I was just good at pretending, good at making myself small and invisible so no one would notice me enough to hurt me. She touched the pendant and felt its warmth spread through her palm. I want to finish this, she said. Reform the council. Protect the humans they've been exploiting for centuries. Build something better than what Mira died fighting. I want, she faltered, searching for courage. I want you to stay too. Silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither of them knew how to say, and then Lucien closed the distance between them in 2 steps, stopping inches away. I'm not good at this, he said, at letting people in, at believing I deserve anything soft or warm or human, at trusting that I won't destroy what I touch. Elena reached up and cupped his face, her hands small and warm against his cold skin. Neither am I, she said. He kissed her then, gentle at first like he was afraid she might shatter, and then deeper, as 3 centuries of loneliness broke against her warmth, like waves against the cliff below. She tasted like coffee and courage, and something he'd forgotten existed, something that felt dangerously close to hope. And when they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. If we do this, if we stay together and fight this fight, I can't protect you from everything, he said. The world we're building is going to be dangerous for a long time. I don't need you to protect me from everything, Elena said. I need you to fight beside me. Equal partners, not protector and protected. He smiled, rare and real and transforming his face into something younger. I can do that, he said. 7 weeks later, Elena walked into the newly reformed council chamber, her heels clicking on polished floors that reflected the winter sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was no longer a cold circle of thrones arranged like a predator's teeth, but a round table made of pale wood with glass inlays, and etched into that glass was Mira's testimony in her own handwriting, permanent and visible, a foundation they'd built the new order on. Elena wore business clothes now, gray slacks and a white blouse, professional and polished, but the pendant hung visible over her collar, a statement and a reminder. Aram greeted her at the door, looking younger somehow despite his ancient years, the weight of 3 centuries of guilt finally lifting. Ready? He asked. She nodded, squeezing the folder of proposals she'd stayed up all night finalizing. Let's start, she said. The first official session of the Reformed Council began with representatives filing in, half vampires and half humans. lawyers and activists and scholars who'd fought for this moment. Lucien sat beside Elena, close enough that their shoulders touched, and under the table their hands linked, fingers intertwining. He'd resigned his old council seat and accepted a new one as human liaison, a position that would have been unthinkable 8 weeks ago. Isla called the meeting to order, her voice clear and formal. First agenda item, she said. Formalizing legal protections for human-vampire relationships, ensuring no one faces execution or exile for loving across species lines. Elena caught Lucien's eye and saw in his face the same mix of grief and determination she felt. Grief for Mira and Thomas, who hadn't lived to see this, determination to make sure their deaths had meant something. He squeezed her hand, 3 quick pulses that she knew meant, "I'm here. I'm with you. We're doing this together." Outside the window, Chicago glittered in daylight, the city spreading in all directions under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. A new world, still dangerous, still fractured by centuries of inequality and exploitation, still marked by the scars of what had come before, but no longer built on lies, no longer sustained by silence. The pendant glowed faintly against Elena's skin, warm and steady, a reminder of the woman who had died to make this moment possible, who had sealed her truth in ruby and silver and waited 300 years for someone brave enough to finish what she'd started. Elena felt that warmth and thought she heard, faint as breathing, a voice that might have been her grandmother's or Mira's or her own saying, thank you, you did it." And she closed her eyes for just a moment before opening them again to face the work ahead, the long, difficult, beautiful work of building something better from the ashes of what had burned.